As a result of recent strategic planning, this presentation, Memory and Scottish Country Dancing, is produced as an education and training initiative of the Scottish Country Dance Teachers Association Canada, TAC, to provide topics of interest as further education for teachers of SCD. The presentation has been given a few times at in-person meetings, but this Zoom session is the first to an international audience from many time zones. It is also being recorded so that teachers and others can watch it at their leisure over the web. Cecily is a retired learning specialist who is fascinated by the brain and the learning process. She will explain how dance teachers can use scientific understandings of the brain to help students learn better. She will share techniques to help your dancers retain information and movement patterns. Cecily will answer questions at the end of the presentation.
Thank you very much, Keith, and thank you to TAC for inviting me. I'm going to share my screen now. Can you see it? Yes, good. All right, so I first started teaching when I taught ice skating at age 14, and I have been fascinated with how people learn ever since that happened. I like to learn and I like to think about learning. This webinar is based on a course that I taught to sixth graders. It was supposed to be study skills, but what I called it was Welcome to Your Brain. And my thoughts are also based on many years of teaching Scottish country dancing. So, how to help your classes remember dances is my subtitle, but it's not just dances, it's dancing and so on. Here's my email address. I love to talk about this. If anyone wanted to have more discussion with me, I will also show this at the end of the presentation. So, the brain. If you put your two fists together, that's about the size of your brain. And it weighs about 3 pounds. So if you're good at math, you can quickly decide what percent of your body weight that would be. For me, it's about 2%, but it uses 25% of the energy needed by the body. And that's one of the reasons that Scottish country dancing is so good for everybody, is that we're using our brains as well as using our bodies. So information comes into the brain through nerves, and it comes in through all of your senses. We don't use the sense of taste or smell very much in Scottish country dancing, except maybe who not to dance with. But other than that, it's mostly sight, hearing, and motion. The information then goes out from the nerves to the muscles. So nerves are in this a lot. And then learning happens when nerves fire at the same time. And the mantra here is neurons that fire together, wire together. So there are various types of memory, and people who study memory have different ideas about how to categorize. So this is my ideas. The first kind of memory is short-term memory. It's kind of like getting your mail at the post office or in your mailbox at your house. What you do is you filter through it and you throw out the things you don't want and you keep the information that you need. And you have to pay attention to do that. So the short-term memory is closely related to attention. And then we have working memory. And working memory is keeping something in your mind as you're doing it. So taking those things that came in the mail and paying the bills or writing back if someone ever writes you a letter, that is working memory. And it's really limited to 7 pieces, but most people really can only remember about 5. And then there's long-term memory. That's your brain's filing cabinet. And In long-term memory, you have to put it in the right place so that your brain can go back and find it. Teachers can help with long-term memory by noting the categories for steps and formations and dances. For example, skip change is primarily a traveling step. Strathspey travel is primarily a traveling step. That's a place for people to file that. If you're talking about poussette, you could say this is a progressive formation, and you will learn other progressive formations. For dances, you could say this is a set dance, and explain what a set dance is. Many of the things you have to put into long-term memory if you are going to be able to dance. For example, before you learn how to skip change, it's really hard to both do the skip change and think about the dance at the same times. So what we're working on in classes is making certain things automatic so that you don't have to think about them. So I'm sure that you have all had times when either your memory or the memory of your classes break down. I know it happens pretty much every week in my class, and that people who are here who are members of my class know what I'm talking about. Either I forget something or they forget something. So they happen during briefings. Your class might listen to a briefing before a dance and then not remember as the dance goes on. People study dances ahead of time, but sometimes if they study them, they get the formations mixed up when they go to the ball, for example. Sometimes when you're teaching a dance, the students know what comes next, but then when they start dancing it, they don't know. For formations, students can learn a formation, but again, can't remember it the next time they come across it. And steps are the same thing. You can do them well when you're working on them, but when it comes to the dance, they go out the window. And by the way, these 3 pictures on the screen are not pictures of dancers having memory breakdown. They are 3 pictures of dancers that happen to be on my computer. So one of the ways to remember things is by using an acronym. One you may have heard about before is the word HOMES, H-O-M-E-S, for remembering the names of the Great Lakes. The acronym I'm going to use is MEMORY, meaning, encode in chunks, multisensory, optimism, relationship, and you need to do it. I have to tell you that the why was very hard to figure out one for. So the rest of my presentation is going to be on these 6 areas. And the first one is meaning. And you're going to have to do something here. Do not write down anything. So our minds do not remember meaningless information very well. It's much easier to remember something that means something to you. So I'm going to flash up on the screen a set of letters. I'm not going to keep it up there very long. And then I want you to see how many of them you remember. Here goes. Okay, try to remember as many of the letters as you can. And if I were in a room with you all, I would have some of you try to do it. But think about that, because here is a much easier way. These are the same letters, but IBM has a meaning. LOL has a meaning. TWA might not have a meaning if you're young enough, and CD probably has a meaning unless you're my grandson's age. So in order to get meaning into our dance teaching, we have to have something, because dances in themselves don't have much meaning. But if you can make up a story where the formations stand for parts of the story, the most popular one that I think everyone has done is the St. John River, where the parts of the story, the river winding out to the sea, etc., really help people remember what they're doing. You can do it for other dances in Leith Country Dance, where the first man dances with his partner, and then with the second woman, the partner gets upset and dances under an arch down to the bottom, and that helps my students remember that dance. Another thing is to think about the shapes that the dance forms. Which dance is it? Linton Plowman. The first formation is circle, four hands round and back. And the second formation is hands across and back. And if you think about that, those are the letters O and X. And so that's another way to put some meaning into the dance. And then humor can be very powerful. I try to use humor in my classes, but the only one that I could think of right now is something that a teacher who shall remain nameless in case you blame her for this, called the bra dance, Fair Donald, because the first couple goes below the second couple, that's the A cup, and then below the third couple, that's the B cup. And then there are two reels of four in a cross, and those are the cross your heart bra. So most people, at least for me, remember that dance after I've taught that. You can't use humor all the time, but it can be powerful. This one, encoding in chunks, is really helpful. And you may have heard someone briefing a dance and then briefing it again by just coming up with one word for each chunk. That can help memory. So you have fewer things to remember if you can put some of the things together. And remember that working memory only holds about 7 items, so trying not to have more than 7 items in a briefing, yeah, sometimes you have to have more. But the next slide I'm going to show you has 2 directions for dances. Here's the first one. I'm not going to give you enough time to read the whole thing, but here is the condensed version. Chase and set, down the middle and up, poussette. It's Flowers of Edinburgh, and that is a much easier thing to remember than this. I think I got this directly out of a dance book, all of those words. Multisensory is very important. The neurons that fire together wire together. So if you are looking at something and hearing it, they're going to be better in memory. And even Confucius knew this, because he said, I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, but I do and I understand. So everything together will help memory. So having your class listen, look, and move all at the same time. When you're teaching a formation, for example, demonstrate what you're doing while you're telling your class what to do. Show and tell. And then when you're having your class walk a formation or part of a dance, talk, or even better, use rhythmic coaching. So walk and talk, show and tell. Both of those are very important. Just a second while I turn my notes page. And the more, again, that neurons fire together, the more your students will learn and remember. The next part is optimism. So you have to have optimism. This is just a random picture of people clapping. That's all I could find for optimism. But they need to believe that they can learn to dance. If you don't believe that, it's really hard to learn anything. And so teachers can help that by being as encouraging as possible. And sometimes people need to let go of the problems of the day. So having something fun to begin your dance, maybe a Kaylee dance, or something funny during warm up helps people let go of that other stuff and get into feeling good about dancing. And then having a fixed versus a growth mindset. This comes from the research of Carol Dweck. And whoops, sorry, I meant not to do that. Carol Dweck is a professor at Stanford University, and she's done quite a lot of research on how people think of themselves as learners. And if they think of a mistake as, oh, that's something that I need to figure out so I don't do it again, is much better than the mindset of, oh, I did that badly, I must be not be good at this. And so trying to help your classes do that growth mindset is very helpful. I didn't put it on the slide, but her website is www.mindsetworks.com. And I'm going to share my presentation with whoever emails me about it. So if you would like that, I'll put the website into the slide that I share with people. All right, the R is relationship. The actual word that I wanted to use there was connections. Relationship was the closest R word I could find to connections. So you have to remember using connections. These pins are connections, and emphasizing the connections between formations is very helpful. I know it helps me when a teacher does that and I'm a student in class. So one way to do it is to teach people how to think ahead, and Golden Pheasant is an example of this. If you just look at it, grand chain, poussette, circle 6 hands round and back, set 2 and turn corners, double triangles. Just 5 things to remember, sounds really easy. But you have to teach the connections, because if you just do the grand chain and you finish it where you normally finish a grand chain, you're not there for the poussette. Same thing from the circle, to set 2 and turn corners. You have to teach those connections. And coming into the double triangles, passing your partner's shoulder is another way that you need to do that. This is a difficult dance, Golden Pheasant, but when I'm teaching newer dancers, for example, Maxwell's Rant, after the reels at the beginning, crossover reels, they have to be thinking about where they're going to go in the next reel. They've done one reel, but it's hard to remember where to go in the next reel. So I tell my class, as you're doing that right-hand turn for 4 bars, you have plenty of time to think, where am I going to end up and where am I going to go for the next reel? Making those connections is really helpful. And the last one, you need to do it, is probably the most important. If you're an active learner, you're actually thinking about what you're learning. And it's not always easy to get a class to do that. So here are some ideas. Briefing a dance, ask dancers to visualize what they will be doing in that dance. Visualization is very helpful because of something called mirror neurons. In your brain, there are neurons that if you're watching someone do something, those neurons learn as if you yourself were doing it. And it's amazing that that can happen, but it can. And even some professional sports people use this idea of visualizing yourself doing it or watching someone else do it. The brain makes those connections just like as if you were doing it. When you were in school, you probably had a teacher who asked you questions. And believe it or not, teachers do not primarily do that to catch people out not having studied. teachers ask questions to activate that part of your mind, to get you thinking about that part. So you can get your class thinking by lots of things. For example, try having the first couple tell you the first 8 bars after they've learned the dance. Have the second couple tell the second 8 bars. And you'd be surprised at how much that helps people to remember the dance in the middle of it. It also, because there's two people in a couple, one of them probably remembers it. We don't want to make people so anxious they lose their optimism. One of the things I do, I don't know if it helps people to remember. I'll have to ask my dancers. Brief the dance with hand gestures only. It makes them have to think. What does she mean when she goes like this? Putting the hands going around. That's a cast off. I usually use those hand motions while I'm briefing because I know that seeing it as well as hearing it will be helpful. But sometimes just having them watch can help with the memory. Oops. So I've presented many activities, and the question might be, how do you choose which one to do? Well, one of the things, you will not do all of these at once. I know many candidates who I've tutored have tried to put everything into a lesson, and that is absolutely correct if you are taking your exam. But it's hard to get people to stop doing that afterwards. So don't try all of these at once. It will not work. And again, as we say to candidates in class, you need to observe. You have to see what your class is doing. Where does the memory break down? And then you can choose which kind of system. You can also make these up yourself. Many of these I've just made up because it seemed the right thing to do at the right time. I don't have the corner on ways to help remember dances. And do remember that working memory is limited. So choose, choose what you emphasize carefully. So I hope I didn't go too fast, but that is the end of my presentation. Please put your questions into the chat if you haven't already done so. And if you think of a question later on, or if you would like a copy of the PowerPoint, please feel free to email me. It's my first name dot last name at gmail.com. So there we are. I'm going to go back to gallery view for myself. Keith, what questions do you have?
Thank you very much for the presentation, for doing that. We'll see if I can. Still
Yeah, people are still entering.
joining us. And there are questions that are coming up. People are put in. I gave you the first one that we can get up here. It's one that I know people have asked before. It gets to the walkthroughs at balls. When you're saying I see, I hear, I do, they hear the briefing
Yes.
and they want to do the walkthrough.
Yes, and if you want people to remember dances, I absolutely encourage walkthroughs at a ball. It will make everyone's dancing much more fun. Now, and I'm going to sound like an old person when I say this, back in the day, we actually studied very hard and learned all the dances, but that is not happening as much anymore. And so it will certainly help the group to remember, either by having inexperienced people come to the top and walk it through, or inexperienced people go to fourth place and watch. So I strongly recommend that.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure we'll get some questions
Oh,
somewhere
I'm sure.
there are the opposite of that. Says, can you give examples of how to help with your class developing a growth mindset?
I think it's mostly the way that the teacher reacts to mistakes. I'm not me, but I know a teacher who says, "Oh, no one died. This was fine." How you make a mistake and how you recover from it. Also, modeling, because I know I make mistakes all the time in class. Fortunately, I have Val there who tells me when I've made a mistake. It's always good to have someone like that in your class. But modeling how, oh, I need to do better next time. That is a growth mindset. And so, how you react to mistakes positively, oh, we didn't get that, let me reteach it, is a way to produce more growth mindset.
Another one is it's a little more. Okay, is there a way to help someone uh, who suffers the effects of a mini stroke?
Ah.
Yes, hard one.
And that probably other questions might have said, how can you help people who are getting older and aren't remembering as well?
Well, that's what I was going to say. That was the other another
Yep.
part. 85
Similar
years old.
question.
Uh,
You you
that's my
you
favorite dance. How does it go?
you can only do so much to help someone's memory. You can do all of these things and still not make it work. So when I had two 80-year-olds in my class who could not remember where to go, I would run around the class and point. I also really suggest that other members of the class not yell at them, but point and gesture to help someone who isn't doing it. And in my experience, in teaching my class and occasionally substituting for Jeffrey's class, is the other members of the class really want to help, and so they will help as well, as long as they don't yell at the person.
Another one is it's along the line of your putting things in blocks. You had the ox dance, you've had the bra dance. Yes, they're well known in this area, I think. uh, but what about rhymes and such like? I mean,
Rhymes are wonderful. I think people remember the Poussette song or the Poussette chant, whatever you want to call it, because it rhymes. Rhymes are very helpful. I just don't happen to be able to make them up quickly. But I think rhymes are wonderful.
even negative rhymes.
Well, it depends on
Well, I
how
don't know.
they're negative.
We had one teacher, one lady, who wrote a song about the tourney. Oh no, not the tourney. People remember the tourney. As soon as you start saying the song, they remember the tourney.
Yeah, songs can help. Songs are a great way. When I was teaching children who had to memorize multiplication tables, there was one boy who could not do it. Multiplication tables have not much in the way of meaning. And so finally, I got him a rap music multiplication table song, and he learned them right away. So for some people, that can be very helpful using a song.
Question here now is about the use of the voice for strengthening memory, especially during briefing. It says, can you comment on the use of the voice, the speed, pauses, breaks, variation in pitch?
Yes, all of the above are very helpful in teaching someone, and if you're teaching someone well, they're more likely to remember. Um, but the important thing is to pause at the right time. Think of the chunks of the dance, think of the chunks that you want to have them remember, and pause at the right moment. Intonation is always very helpful. A question mark in your voice will say one thing, and I personally, when I'm teaching, do not ask the class, do you have any questions? If someone has a question, I always answer it, but ask them, do you have any questions, sort of detracts my teaching. But that's my personal, that's not something I particularly recommend to anyone else.
And we've got right and left. People that don't seem to know the right from the left.
Yes, I joke sometimes with my classes that right, I never learned my right from my left because I didn't go to kindergarten. I went to my first year of schooling in London, England, and they started right in with teaching me to read. And I also show that sometimes I have two left hands. You know how you ask someone to put the left hand up. But those are the joking things about it. But yes, some people do have trouble with right and left. And it can be helpful to them to use the parts of the room toward the kitchen, toward your partner's side, up the dance, um, to try to help them with remembering if it's a rights and lefts. Now, rights and lefts, the formation, I think you just have to do it a lot of times. Because repetition really is very helpful in putting things in that filing cabinet in the brain.
I want to comment is this, can you comment on long-term memory? Why do some people remember some dances better than others? Rather, it's why do
Oh,
remember
I
some?
wish I knew. Long-term memory is fascinating, and the most fascinating thing about it is that we remember things we learned very early in life much better than the things we've learned later in life. So people with dementia can often remember their childhoods, whereas they don't know what they had for lunch or even if they had had lunch. So long-term memory is a mystery. I don't know that people studying it have figured it out yet. I'm still learning.
It says, do you think that sending videos or a summary of the class after doing it helps people in the learning process?
Well, it certainly can help some people. My one of my dancers in class asks me to send the program for the class ahead of time. It's a social class, so I do have a program and I have to make it up for my musicians. So I have it ahead of time and I send it to her. And I can see that her having watched them ahead of time primes her brain for learning them in class. Sending them afterwards, I wouldn't particularly take the time, but if anyone's interested, there are videos out there of many of the dances, and they can go and look.
It's one of those. Oh, he's talking about shortcut terminology when he got it's part of your rhymes and phrases, teapots. Yes.
Yeah, people remember teapots, even though it doesn't particularly look like teapots.
It's like hello, goodbye setting as well. The
Mhm.
RSCDS didn't accept that till it was actually, they were battered on the head and they finally accepted it.
Yes, I always wanted to call teapots teacups because it reminded me of the teacup ride at Disneyland that I once went on.
Oh. Said, should we use the dancer's music as a tool for formation association? That's a hard one.
For some people, that would probably be very helpful. I know some people connect the formations that are in dances with the music. And that's another sense is a musical sense, and certainly that can help some people. It wouldn't help everybody, but there's no harm in connecting the music, the actual tune, to something. Except that we then go on and have three or four supporting tunes, which don't have the same formation, same music for that formation. Um, I hope that answered that question.
So I'm just saying here, because I'm right-handed, if I think I'm going to have a problem, I touch my right shoulder at the correct moment. The sense of touch helps. I mean, they've not gone on to it, but I mean, you could follow on and say,
Right.
do you need somebody on
In
the shoulder to tell them that's your right?
in my case, and because I'm in America where we drive on the right, if I think of hitchhiking, that's my right shoulder. Um, but other people would have other ways of remembering it. Tricks can help, yes.
Then there's a question, what about repeating dances? Do you do it 6 weeks
Repetition,
or further away or what?
repetition is absolutely helpful. Um, we had Hooper's Jig on a dance program recently, and it was Jeffrey's class because he had his knee replaced. I taught them a few times, and they did Hooper's Jig and messed it up the first time and messed it up the second time, but the third time they actually got it. So yes, repetition can be very helpful. And my class usually says, "Can we do that again next week?" Um, and it can be very helpful because then they can get the nuances as well as putting down repetition in the brain.
There's an earlier one that I missed. It scrolled off before. It says, it's a comment. Often people who, the people who presumably do gender neutral calling benefits most, and the people who are neurodiverse are one and the same. I'm not sure. Oh no,
Yeah,
no, I think they're answering. I see. No, the question above. I see. I see
yeah.
the answer. Somebody's response to the question. How do you reconcile gender-neutral calling with those who are neurodiverse or dyslexic?
That is a very big topic to get into, and I would be happy to have email conversations with anyone about that. We are doing gender neutral teaching in our branch, and that's why it was quick for me to say, what if someone has trouble with right and left? Because I'm always trying to think of another way, using clockwise or using something else. The more ways you can help, the more people that you will reach. And I saw there was another comment about neurodiverse. And that phrase means that you think differently than other people. And it's on a continuum. All of us think differently from each other. I know Jeffrey remembers tunes and can associate them with a dance, and I cannot do that. I have to go and listen to a recording before I can remember the tune. So we're neurodiverse in that way. Often neurodiversity refers to the autism spectrum, but not always. So yes, people learn differently, and you have to think about, observe the people in your class and think about how are they learning, what works.
Oh, there was another question, but somebody's asking me for the lyrics for the Oh No, Not the Tournay song. I've got a question for you though. One of my own,
Mhm.
it's one I emailed. How do you measure success in this? How do you see success?
Well, if people remember how to do the dance or remember what comes next, I mean, it's not a measurable thing. It's just if they seem to do better, if they remember more. And certainly in my class, I think people are remembering more because of some of the things that I do. But I don't really have any data on it, I'm afraid.
No, no, I remember, I mean, with kids, teaching kids, you'd think
Hmm.
they know nothing. They've learned nothing. They sit down. You go do a demo and they know all 6 dances straight off. Now we've got something here. Since we want to teach dancing rather than dancers, how do we get dancers to learn the techniques you have discussed and incorporate them into their own dancing?
Well, the way that that figures in with memory is that some of that has to become automatic. So more drill, more work on the formations, the steps, the technique, um, reminding people in the dance. I tried to put some of that technique into my rhythmic coaching on those days when the musicians aren't there and I have to use my voice. I'm very lucky to have musicians for my class. Um,
I think
but
a lot.
yes, reminders.
I think with that one as well, one of the big reminders is you're reminding them that they're dancing as a team, and
Hmm.
it's not solos, 8 people learning to individually do a dance. It's 8 people learning to do a combined uh, feature, a combined dance, and they're there to help one another as well.
Yes,
And they've got eyes, they've got hands, they can help anybody.
as long as they don't use their voices.
That's correct. No shouting. No words. That seems to be the end of the list of questions. Is slowing down. So again, I thank you, Cecily, for this presentation. And if you want to repeat your email, if people want to contact you again.
Absolutely. Cecily.selling@gmail.com. I'm also on Facebook. If you wanted to ask me to be a friend, I can get messages that way. Oh, here's another question. Why some people can't keep time to the music? It's that neurodiversity. Some people require a lot more repetition to get their hearing connected to their motion. Um, that's about all I could say about that one.
Says there's 2 more coming through, but I think that was a, I don't know.
Well, I love talking about this, so anybody who would like to email me, that would be great. And if you see me somewhere at an event, I like to talk about it.
Thank you very much. So I will note that.